nobody in Milbrook waved back at Tasha Reeves anymore. Not since the divorce. Not since her husband walked away, leaving her with a 5-year-old son, unpaid bills, and a reputation she didn't deserve. Her ex-husband had told people his version of the story. Milbrook had believed every word. The women who once invited her to book clubs suddenly avoided eye contact. Neighbors who used to stop and chat hurried past as though they were late for somewhere important. At school pickup, mothers quietly pulled their children closer, as if heartbreak were contagious. Tasha stopped trying to explain herself. People rarely change an opinion they've built from gossip. Instead, she poured every ounce of her energy into the only person whose opinion truly mattered, her little boy, Micah. If she could raise him to be kind, to be honest, to never judge another person by rumors, then perhaps all of this pain would mean something. Every morning before sunrise she was already awake, preparing breakfast, packing lunch, checking Micah's homework, then rushing between two jobs just to keep the lights on. Life had become a series of sacrifices. She skipped meals more often than she'd ever admit. She wore shoes long after they should have been replaced. Yet somehow, Micah never went to bed hungry. He never doubted that his mother loved him. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or so she thought. Her shift at the diner had run late. She hurried toward the last evening bus. Inside her bag sat the dinner she'd planned to eat on the journey home, the only proper meal she'd have that day. Then she noticed him. A man sat alone on a bus bench outside the pharmacy, perfectly dressed, expensive coat, polished shoes. Yet something about him seemed broken. People walked around him without a second glance. No one stopped. No one asked if he was all right. Tasha almost kept walking herself. She really couldn't afford to miss another bus. But kindness has a way of interrupting even the busiest lives. Some part of her still stopped anyway, stood a careful distance away, and asked if he was all right. He looked up, surprised that anyone had asked. Late 40s, maybe, a good coat, no watch, like something had been removed from his wrist recently, and he still wasn't used to the bare feeling of it. His eyes were red in a way that had nothing to do with tiredness. "My son died 4 years ago," he said, to a total stranger, like the words had been sitting behind his teeth so long they'd finally forced their way out on their own. Today would have been his birthday. "I don't," he stopped, shook his head. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." Tasha didn't answer right away. She reached into her bag instead, pulled out the foil-wrapped plate that was supposed to be her dinner, and held it out to him. "You don't have to talk," she said, "but you look like a man who hasn't eaten today, and grief is worse on an empty stomach. Take it." He stared at the plate like it was something rare. "I can't take your food." "You're not taking it." "I'm giving it," she said, echoing the words without knowing why they felt right. "You're allowed to have a bad day, but you're allowed to let a stranger feed you through it. Nobody keeps score on nights like this." He took the plate. His hands weren't steady when he did. They sat there longer than either of them planned to. Him talking in pieces between bites, her mostly listening, offering nothing but the fact that she wasn't going anywhere. When her bus came, she let it pass. She caught the next one instead. "Thank you," he said, as she finally stood to go. "I didn't catch your name, Tasha." She didn't ask his. It didn't occur to her that it mattered. He was just a man having the worst night of his year, and she was a woman who knew exactly what that felt like. Neither of those things came with a name tag. She never saw the black car waiting at the corner, or the driver who'd circled the block for 20 minutes, worried, before his employer finally waved him off and said he'd rather walk home alone that night. 3 weeks later, the agency sent Tasha to a house on Hollow Ridge, double pay, last-minute job. She needed the money, so she didn't ask questions. A big house out on Hollow Ridge, the kind with its own gate and a name instead of a number. She left Micah with her neighbor Mercy, the only person in Milbrook who still looked Tasha in the eye, and drove 40 minutes in a car that made a sound she was pretending not to hear. She walked into the kitchen and froze. "Marcus looks up." "The bus bench," he said, They both stood there in the sudden, absurd recognition of it. I never got your last name. I didn't get the chance to thank you properly either for the food or for staying. I didn't know this was your house, Tasha said. I mean, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know. Tasha from the bus bench clean houses for a living, he said. Small towns, not that small, she said. You just don't usually cross paths with people like me. Something shifted in his face at that, not offense, but recognition of a truth he didn't like. Marcus Whitfield, he said, finally offering the name he hadn't given her that night. And for what it's worth, I'd like to keep crossing paths with you. Not because of this house, because of that bench. And that plate of food you didn't have to give away. Tasha got to work anyway, the way she always did, quiet and efficient because in her experience, the faster she disappeared into the job, the less anyone had reason to look at her twice. Except this time, he kept looking, not out of curiosity about a stranger, but because he already knew exactly what kind of person gave away her dinner to a broken man on a bus bench. She scrubbed a burn mark off his stove that 3 cleaners before her had given up on. She noticed his son's photo on the mantel, the same son whose birthday she now understood, and straightened it without being asked, without comment, and kept moving. You knew, he said quietly, that night. You knew what that day meant. And you gave me your food anyway. I didn't know anything about you, Tasha said. I just knew what that kind of hungry, hollowed-out quiet looks like. I've worn it myself, more nights than I'd like to admit. Everyone who finds out who I am afterward treats me differently, he said. You're the first person who was kind to me before you had any reason to want something back. She came back the following week, and the week after. Marcus started making a point of being in the kitchen when she arrived, not to supervise, she realized, but because the house was quiet otherwise, and quiet had started to feel less like peace and more like a punishment. He was serving alone. He learned about Micah by accident, from a drawing that fell out of her bag. A stick figure family, 3 people, a son with too many rays. Yours? He asked. My son. He draws his dad in every picture even though he's never met him. Tasha tucked it away quickly, embarrassed, waiting for the look, the one she got at the grocery store, the one that said, of course, a single mother, of course there's a mess behind her. It didn't come. Bring him next time, Marcus said instead. This house could use a kid's noise in it. She almost said no. Every instinct told her that men like Marcus Whitfield didn't invite a cleaning woman's child into their home without an angle, that somewhere in this there was a catch waiting to close on her. But Mercy couldn't watch Micah every week forever, and something about the way Marcus asked, plainly, without performance, made her decide to risk it once. Milbrook found out the way small towns find out everything. Fast, wrong, and cruel. Tasha Reeves is after Marcus Whitfield's money. She got herself invited into his house. You know how that works. Poor man grieving, and she saw an opening. None of them asked Tasha directly. They didn't need to. They'd already decided who she was long before she ever set foot in a house on Hollow Ridge. And this just confirmed the story they'd written for her years earlier. She heard it secondhand from Mercy, who heard it from everyone. For the first time in years, Tasha almost quit, almost stopped showing up, because it felt safer to disappear than to be a headline in her own hometown. Marcus found her outside the house one evening, sitting in her car instead of coming in, deciding whether to knock or drive away. I heard what they're saying, he said through the window. Then you understand why I can't keep coming here. I understand why they're saying it, he said. That's not the same thing as it being true, and it's not the same thing as me caring. What a town full of people who've never once brought you a casserole thinks about who you are. She laughed despite herself, a real one. You gave a stranger your dinner on the worst night of his year and never asked his name, Marcus said. You've never once asked me for anything since. Not money, not a favor, not a way into a life you think looks easier than yours. That's the most honest thing that's happened in this house and for years. and I'm not going to let a town's gossip talk me out of it. The wedding, when it came a year later, was small. Before the ceremony, Marcus took her hands and finally said the thing he'd never quite said plainly. Everyone in this town looked at your circumstances and decided that was your whole story. I looked at a woman who gave away her dinner to a stranger who had nothing to give her back. I saw the woman they refused to see. That's the difference between people who judge you for what you don't have and the one person who noticed everything you had to give. Even when you had the least to spare, the wedding held at Mercy's house, not Hollow Ridge, because Tasha wanted her son to remember it as home getting bigger, not her disappearing into somebody else's world. Half of Milbrook showed up anyway, the same people who'd once angled their strollers away from her at pickup, curious, a little ashamed, unsure how to stand in a room with a story they'd gotten so wrong. Tasha didn't hold it against them. She'd learned something in the past year that mattered more than being right about who doubted. People will often judge you by your circumstances, but your character is the one thing circumstances can never write for you. Keep giving, even when you have little left. Keep showing up as who you really are. The right people will eventually see it.